Hello, this is Mr. Smith with the presentation for today. So you can click on the daily participation for December and January, resubmit, and a text box will open up and you can type in three significant items for today's lesson. So just looking at the future of the economy, because that influences, of course, where we're going to put our money and how we're going to invest. In the next 10 years, we'll be focused a lot on, in this the first part of the decade, of course, obviously on the effects of the pandemic and then the changes that occurred because of it. And then, of course, America's continuing struggle with going into a service economy while at the same time maintaining some of its manufacturing through automation and outsourcing of jobs. So, some predictions for the next decade is that the U.S. federal debt will rise probably considerably, especially because of the pandemic. And that will put stress especially on the fact that interest rates or paying interest on those bonds is going to take up a bigger and bigger chunk of the budget probably. The economy will boom and bust. So that's not a surprise. It will probably bust again within the decade. Since it happened in 2020, it might happen again just before the beginning of the next decade. So that's pretty likely. And we could see some overexcitement after the pandemic. So the economy could expand dramatically and it might snap back into reality briefly with a small economic contraction. But this isn't unusual. Business cycles have their ups and downs, expansion and contraction, so that will continue as normal. The value of the dollar will dip and swell, and once again, this depends upon the money supply, but also the faith in the American government and the economy. It's possible with more spending because of the pandemic, you might see inflation start to occur, so some economists are worried about that. So the dollar will go up and down, but as we've seen in the notes, that is also typical too. Climate change could threaten our financial system. And whether or not you think man is responsible is irrelevant when it comes to the economic consequences. The economics of whether or not we should become more involved or curtail man-made activity is different, but the results of it, even if it's completely responsible because of nature, for instance, there are some skeptics that make up the minority of the scientific world that say that it's because of sunspots or climate, long-term climate change that happens all the time on Earth. Even if that's the case, we'll still have rising seawater. We'll have coastlines where most of the city and population lives, or entire states like Florida that would be in danger. Because of the changing climate, we can see drought and flooding in areas where it didn't exist before. You can see long, sharp cold spells because of warmer climate. Warm air masses pushing into the North Pole, it can actually push some of that colder air down deep into the United States that we otherwise might not experience. And so it can cause all kinds of climate-based variables or variations in those variables that we wouldn't have predicted before. So that can have a dramatic impact on the economy as well. Water supply, food supply, disruption of the trade that occurs or transportation of goods and services, all that can result because of it. And then healthcare will become more expensive. As the baby boomers become older, so will their medical expenses, and they will live longer than previous generations. And that will increase the demand for medicine and for doctor services. And so that will drive up healthcare costs as well. Then looking at the real long term, we can look at ourselves as just being in the infancy of the age of automation. We've had automation for a little while actually now, as workers as early as maybe the 80s or 90s were replaced by robotic systems in assembly lines, like in car factories, for instance. But that's just going to continue to increase, and it's going to increase significantly. Now, the charts you can zoom in and pause if you would like, but the one in the top left-hand corner on the infographic on the right-hand side, that's automation's impact on the job market, and they believe it will start to be felt by the mid-2020s. So 24, 25, 26, somewhere around there, you'll start to see an impact on jobs, particularly within transportation and storage, manufacturing, and wholesale and retail trade. And we can already see that with automated checkouts at stores, for instance. We don't often see the other two, but it already has been in manufacturing already. And we can see that there will be a trend that is going to continue to replace workers. Then in the second graph, upskilling needed as a routine and manual jobs make up half of the workforce. So You can see in 2016, for instance, 48% of the workforce is involved in physical and manual labor, but that's going to decrease significantly to 35 or 33% by 2030. So within a decade, that's going to happen. And so we'll see a lot of people squeezed out that might have been able to find work before. Then chart number 3, automation adopted varies with company size. As you can see here, the type of company has an impact on its relationship to automation. And you can see with the increase in the number of employees, you see an increased interest in automation because you would like to cut down on costs by replacing some of those labor costs that you have associated with employees. Number 4, declining robot prices also would help encourage, as we see prices continue to drop as producing them becomes more efficient. There's a greater supply. You'll see prices drop in the marketplace for robots, and that will increase their acceptability amongst businesses, including small businesses, who are the ones who really can't afford labor that much. Number 5, over-reliance on manual work means automation's impact is worse in some regions, and you can see places where the reliance is still pretty high. So the percentage of manufacturing jobs with a high potential of automation includes the United States as much as 53%. So still we have 53% of our workforce that can be replaced by automation. So it hasn't all been done yet, and that will cause some growing pains in the next decade or so. And then number 6, lower educated are hit hardest as manual tasks are phased out, and so the lesser the education, so unskilled and semi-skilled labor could see the greatest threat from automation in particular. And the last one, number 7, South Korea is miles ahead when it comes to robot automation. You can see the number of installed industrial robots per 10,000 manufacturing employees by selected countries is quite a bit higher in South Korea with 710. So you can see some of these trends already emerging within that particular country. So that's something to look into. Investing in robotics and automation could be a big deal. Of investing in businesses that are going to help confront some of these changes that might happen because of our climate, or in medicine, especially geriatrics in particular, which focuses on the elderly. Those could all be good investments to make going in the future, but also some wariness because the overall economy could experience some changes because of these predictions.